Alrighty, and we are back. Wow, it's been a very, very long time. This feels very foreign to me right now. But yeah, we are officially back. I had a very hectic previous month where I didn't really have much freedom to do anything on the weekends. But now my schedule's clear for the summer, and we are officially back with bringing everyone content and new things to learn about for this very fun summer that we have ahead. And welcome to another episode of The More You Know. This is kind of like a little revamped season now. Today we are joined by Steve, and I want to bring everyone into the realm of tabletop games and Dungeon and Dragons. So, Steve, can you give us a little brief intro of yourself?
Hi, my name is Stephen Kelsey. I am the DM for various actual play and live play D&D campaigns, as well as a number of other entertaining things that have nothing to do with Dungeons and Dragons. I also run a little YouTube channel. I'm an internet content creator as well, but a lot of my content is D&D focused. So that's what I'm here to talk about today, and I won't distract with the other stuff.
And I've been itching to get someone in to talk about Dungeon and Dragons because I feel like it's a very broad topic that no one really knows about. Because if you really mention Dungeons and Dragons to a lot of people, they're just gonna refer to you as like a very nerdy type of person who really doesn't have a social life, which I don't like that people call them that, because for me, I am kind of nerdy, and if I were to choose so, I would definitely want to just stay inside and play video games because that's more relaxing and fun than going out. But I wanted to shed some light on like what Dungeons and Dragons really is and like why it's so addicting, because I see people on Reddit who get really intense with it, and they actually have Dungeons and Dragons nights, which what I've seen from some Discord chats. And I kind of just want to get myself immersed into it from the view of someone who is actually playing it.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah.
so can you kind of just describe, like, first off, what Dungeons and Dragons really is?
Okay, so Dungeons and Dragons is a primarily, and when I describe Dungeons and Dragons, to clarify, there are tabletop RPGs, which is what everyone, like the broader form of what everyone thinks about people sitting around a table and rolling dice and pretending to be characters. And then there's specifically Dungeons and Dragons. For this podcast's sake, we're just going to call it all Dungeons and Dragons. That's very common to do, and we're just going to talk about Wizards of the Coast's Dungeons and Dragons, like the main famous tabletop RPG. So what it is a fantasy world that has guidelines, rules, a form of physics, including magic, and various structures that help a table tell a story. And they do so both with their own improvisational skills as well as dice in order to make checks within the rules of this story. And so it just kind of gives you like bowling lane bumpers to kind of help get your ball down the lane toward the pins that you want to hit with your story notes. And it's run, of course, by what is commonly referred to as a dungeon master. And this is the storyteller of the journey. They're the person that either does the research in existing published adventures that they can read that their players don't, that kind of give them what to run the players through, interesting characters and challenges and combats for them to fight. Or, as is most often the case, the dungeon master will be inventing the story, either as they go or with lots and lots of notes. But and then giving those players those same sorts of puzzles and challenges, but it all comes from the imagination of the dungeon master. And so that's really D&D. A lot That's a long explanation. The very simple explanation is it's a collaborative storytelling game with a few dice and rules to help give it some framework. And then that's it. That's what D&D is.
That's very interesting. Talking about dungeon masters, like, it sounds like just one person's really controlling the show. Is
Yeah,
that kind of how it is, or does every player get to chime in and be and kind of just say what they want to do in the next adventure, and then the dungeon master can collaborate with them to create adventure or some type of thing for the next one.
yeah. So a lot of games, yeah, it's the dungeon master that kind of has a world, and they tell people to create their characters, and then the players get to create like they usually coordinate with the dungeon master, but they get to pretty much create who they want to be in this world, right? Like, obviously, if it's a Lord of the Rings style fantasy setting and someone's like, I want to be a robot, the DM might be like, you can't be a robot. But you might be able to be like a stone golem, which is sort of like a robot, just not, digital, that kind of thing. That's kind of the standard thing. That's the general belief. And I do believe that we're working as a D&D community. A lot of DMs and a lot of these performative D&D games and things are working to kind of show that world creation doesn't have to live on the dungeon master. I can make sort of a world and an overarching plot, and then the beats in between the plot can be sort of filled in by the improv of the characters. So the players in the moment can say, like, I was a sailor, as, that's part of their character backstory. Maybe they're playing a sailor, maybe we're in a port town, and they're like, they might say, I want to see if any of my old sailing buddies are out on the docks and can give us some information about that. Now, yeah, I might have to then, if I have them roll a check for it, roll a d20, and add a check for it to see if they are lucky enough that one of their old friends is there. Maybe I might have them do that. But then this player has basically forced my hand to essentially create an NPC that their player used to know and that is friends with them. And so they've sort of informed the narrative. And so that's why I call it collaborative storytelling, because even in games where the DM has a really clear vision of what they want to do with the campaign, players asking questions and rolling dice automatically influences how the story is told. And some campaigns get real serious with that. There's tons of campaigns where the pre-play session, the gathering to kind of create your characters and discuss what you all want to play, that, in my opinion, a good DM should be taking information from their players about what their players are interested. Do they like romance? Do they like political intrigue? Are they big fans of steampunk? Or do they like low fantasy where magic is extremely rare and dangerous? You want your players to be playing in worlds and with plots that they're excited about. And so a DM is both the controlling narrative teller and the in-service narrating teller, the kind of support of what would be fun for the other players to come. It's kind of a dual role, which is interesting and fun. And it's why I don't usually recommend, if it's anyone's first time, that they first time be a DM. I usually recommend that they play a couple sessions, only to kind of keep the pressure off, and then maybe start coming up with their own worlds.
Yeah, I was gonna say it sounds like being a dungeon master it comes with a lot of responsibility,
Yeah,
because it kind of sounds like you're kind of controlling everyone's, like, if everyone has fun or not, or if everyone enjoys what they're doing.
a lot of it is on the DM's, the dungeon master's shoulders. I think there is some player agency there, right? It's just like going to a party. The host of the party could put out fun things to do, but if the attendee of the party is just resistant to engaging with anything, then they're not going to have fun. And that's not necessarily going to be the host's fault. But I agree with you. For the large part, the dungeon master has to make things interesting. That's their job. They have to come up with the challenges, the mysteries, the plot lines, and surprise the players a lot of the time. So that puts the weight on it, versus a player who's just focused on their one character. Like, their whole job is to have fun, and part of the way to have that fun is to really know and get to embody a character that you create, and then just kind of live in that person, which is a little bit nicer from a player standpoint, because it means that you just kind of maybe on the drive over or ride over to where you're playing, or 15 minutes before the session going online, you just sort of kind of get center yourself, and it's like, all right, I'm playing this character. What did we do last session? What does my character care about? What am I interested in? The sort of things that kind of get you into a headspace, sort of like mentally preparing for work in the mornings. Except instead of it being work, it gets to be fun, and you can do a bunch of wild stuff, and kind of have a lot of goofs and jokes with your friends and stuff like that.
That's actually very cool because it kind of gives you kind of like an escape from reality
Mm-hmm.
into a world where you're in total control of everything. Like if you want to do something, you can do it. You just have to kind of just like write the storyline of like this alternative universe.
Mm-hmm.
There's there's one thing that I've always wondered too because I've heard of the infamous like 18-sided die. Is it
20 sided
20?
die. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the 20-sided die. Can you walk me through of like why, like, first off, that's a lot of sides, but like
Yeah.
what do this what does the dice really judge?
So the dice is sort of just a randomizer, right? That's all it is. And so it essentially, because it's a 20 sided die, has a 5% chance to come up on any of those numbers at any given roll. And so the way that D&D kind of mechanically works is that primarily, and especially in 5th edition, which is a real kind of like streamlined, that's the most current edition of D&D. It's the most current rule set, and it's very streamlined. But the way that D&D generally works is that, like you said, as a player, you kind of can do whatever you want, or at least you can ask to do whatever you want. So, you walk into a tavern, you order a beverage. I'm not going to make a player be like, roll charisma to see if the bartender pays attention to you. I'm not going to say something like that. I'm going to instead say, if somebody's like, I want to slam my beverage on the table and gather the entire tavern's attention while I tell them that we're going to ransack the town. And so you'll have a skill on your character sheet that will kind of relate to that. In that case, I'd probably say intimidation. And that skill will have like a bonus stat to it, like a +1 or a +2 or a +3 or what have you. Then I'll tell the character, roll that skill. I'll tell the player that they need to roll the skill. And they will roll a d20 and add whatever bonus they have to the skill to that d20. They don't need to know what skill they're rolling in advance. I'm going to say what I think most relates to the action that they're attempting to do. Then, based off the roll and a difficulty check that I have mentally set in my head, which D&D has like guidelines and helpers to help dungeon masters sort of figure out sort of the general good feel for how hard things should be, and how to kind of do that on the fly in their head. And so maybe, if they're trying to intimidate a tavern, but it's not a particularly busy day, and they're trying to just tell them, and it's a tiny little town, and they're a big, scary fighter, I might tell them, yeah, it's a challenge rating of 15. If you get a 15 or higher, which is the number on the d20 plus your bonus, you will successfully cow this town, and they'll just sort of not resist you, and you can just rob them. Or it could be the same thing for an attack. If somebody swings a sword at a dragon, they have a bonus to their ability to hit the dragon. And so they add that to a d20. And then there's separate die for damage and other things that seem like they're complicated, but in reality, it's just basically the DM tells you you have a thing on your sheet that adds a bonus to a d20 roll. Roll the d20, add the bonus. If it passes the DM's challenge rating number that they've got in their head or they've verbalized at the table, you succeed. If it doesn't, you fail. That's really it. So it's a lot of d20 rolling and then some other die, which is why Dungeons and Dragons dice sets come in sets of 7. Because
Holy
there's
cow.
there's d12s, d10s, d8s, d6s, which are normal dice, and d4s, and then of course the d20. And that's because different weapons, that's all like a video game. That's all about optimization and strategies of different things doing different amount of damage, but to like in different ways. And that gets more into the nuts and bolts. But a person playing D&D for the first time doesn't really need to know most of that. They just need to know their character, kind of their vibe, have a sheet that's filled out, which any DM is going to help you with character creation, and have a sheet filled out with their stats, and then have a d20 or have like a d20, or if you're playing online, which is a lot of play because of the pandemic right now, just bring up a dice. You can literally type dice roller in Google and it will give you a dice roller that will have d20s and d12s and d10s, and you can just click on them and roll them. So you don't even need physical die. You don't need anything physical. You don't need to spend any money on it. You just kind of need to show up um and play. It's coming back for some physical get-togethers, but I'd say the vast majority of quantity of D&D games played is probably digital because the pandemic really opened it up. Like there was Roll20 and D&D Beyond and uh other digital things that I can't think of, Fantasy Grounds um before. And these were all tools to help people play digitally and over a distance. When the pandemic hit, everyone started using these already existing tools and realizing that you can play in a lot more D&D games. And again, let's say you're a player. If you hop onto Roll20, which is just a set of software to sort of emulate what you would physically have. So you can have a character sheet, you can have maps on it and everything like that. But as a player, you can just sign up to that for free. Then you can download Discord for free. Then you can chat over the internet, voice chat, and play tabletop completely without spending a dime. Even D&D's starter set, their actual physical like digital starter set for people just to start playing it or learn how to play it, is completely free. They do not charge on any of the, you can just download those PDFs off their website, and you can find out if it's for you. So yeah, it's a very easy game to jump into, and online has made it so much easier. I mean, the reason I'm running 3 simultaneous campaigns is
Oh
because
wow.
2 of them are online. One of them is in person, but 2 of them are online. And I play in a 4th campaign that is in person. But that's because I was fortunate enough that my gaming group was in it was easy for us to be the only people we saw because we were a tight group of people with no children and not living with or interacting with any high risk people, and all of us worked from home. So we were not seeing anybody else anyway. But so I was able to keep kind of a social pod that way for just D&D. But that was only for one of my games, and then the other are, and one that I play in with that same group, and then the other ones are on Twitch. So I just, well, I mean, I play on Roll20 or and over Zoom for those. Yeah.
How long are each sessions really? Or does that just kind of depend on how long like you guys want to go?
That's kind of the group's sort of vibe. A lot of people like to play D&D for like 4 to 5 hours at a time, which is like an evening,
Jeez.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I, on the other hand, and I think it's becoming more common because of all these D&D podcasts and streams and stuff, I like a 2 to 2.5 hour session. I like a session that takes about the time, maybe 3 hours if it goes super long. Um, but uh, but a session that takes as long as like a big blockbuster movie. I think that that's good. I think that that is something that a lot of people can make time for in their lives. I don't think that a lot of adult people or people with jobs and kids or family members they have to take care of or just other interests in general can easily commit to a 5-6 hour session on a Sunday afternoon. That's really tough. Versus both of my like or uh 2 of my campaigns are on weeknights at like 7:30 p.m. West Coast time, and they go till about 10. Sometimes they start at 8 and they go till 10:30. Right? Like that's not a long, huge amount of time, and it's easy to do. You're probably not doing anything super cool on a Monday or a Tuesday. And so why not game a little bit with friends like you would if you were just popping on Overwatch or Call of Duty or what have you. Because it's the same sort of social interaction, just a little bit more imagination, a little bit less skill challenging.
If you were to compare this to a video game that's out on like consoles and that everyone can play right now, would you say like this does like kind of sound like Elder Scrolls of Skyrim?
Yeah,
Is it like in the same realm?
Yeah,
or
100. It's like Elder Scrolls with co-op, right? I if this was Skyrim, it would be like the Dovahkiin and a few other people were challenging me, who was running all of the NPCs and plot for you. And that's in the way that it's like Skyrim is interesting too. I think that video games with their open worldness have been moving more toward D&D or toward these sort of tabletop games, because I can't tell you how many campaigns I've run where I'll be like, oh, I'm thinking in terms of like, okay, my party has sort of like their main plots, and then they all have their personal like goals within that, or their own backstory stories that they want to like resolve something in. So I'm thinking about those, but also, everybody likes a shopping episode, right? Like they like fun shops, or maybe while they're traveling along the road, I as a DM think it would be fun to do like a random encounter table where I have them roll a d20, and then based off the result, one of the random events happens. And so there's a bit of chance and a bit of luck to it. And so the way that people can meander off the main plot or get caught up in side quests or get excited about random NPCs in a game like Elder Scrolls or a game like Witcher 3, is very Dungeons and Dragonsy. That is very much what D&D is like. And getting to kind of control as a player, or in the D&D tabletop case, a party, sort of where you go, when you go, and what you focus on and what you're excited to kind of do. Because some people, they play Skyrim and they just burn right through it. Other people put a couple 100 hours into it.
That is me.
Yeah, and that's me too. That was me for Fallout. That's me for every big RPG. That's me for Bethesda.
I gotta build every connection that I can, and I just want to know other storylines other than the main one.
And that's a gift for like that. That's a gift at a table for a DM, because DMs are usually people who have a story idea, and then as they're developing that story idea, come up with all these kind of side clever things. Because we've all watched movies and played video games. Like I've said this before, and I'll say it again. Once somebody's kind of comfortable with D&D, like just a little bit comfortable with it, they have the tools to become a DM. We've all read books, read comics, seen comic book films, watched cartoons, watched anime. We all know what like different plots are. And so then it's about, if you're interested in it, it's about creating a world with that. And the world doesn't have to be this big Game of Thronesian, complex, bureaucratic, political. It can literally just be like, all right, you're in a you could literally just be like, what if Cyberpunk, but instead 2077, but minus all the glitches and stuff. What if Cyberpunk 2077, but it's fantasy, it's all in one city, and it's just about gang wars in that city. I'm not going to do any of the corporate stuff or the cyberpunky stuff. I'm just going to say that there's these 4 gangs trying to control the city, and that's going to take 20-30 sessions to tell over time, because you got characters, and I'm just going to come up with things. I'm just going to come up with, it's like, okay, well, they're going to meet their first crime lord, but that's not all the crime lords. What are we going to do about that? So it's just kind of fun backwards storytelling, and then you just lift parts from the properties that you like and change them around a little bit, and you get to create these fun worlds. That's why it's so important to have that it's called session 0, that actually getting started into playing D&D session, to know what your players like. Because if you have a table and everybody's a big fan of Westerns, well, make it easy for yourself as a DM. You know, it might be fantasy, it might be with swords and arrows, but you can still make that a Western. You can still have like deserts and small one horse towns and bandits and stuff like that. That's all allowed in fantasy. You just, instead of guns, it's crossbows. And then sometimes sword fights. Like that's what, or magic spells, or maybe guns that shoot magic spells. For like an arcane gunslinger. But yeah, you have fun with that. And so that's why, I think that's why people love D&D so much, is it's the closest thing most people get to being able to have the feeling of a storyteller or a writer or a like a showrunner or a film director or an actor, um without having to be trained in it, without having to spend years of schooling in it and then struggle to try and be it and then not have control over everything you're about. Instead, at a table, it's your friends. And if you want to do like a brooding rogue, you can. If you want to play just a wacky kind of musician, you can. If you want to play a fantasy version of the 80s classic television series The A-Team, where you just kind of ride around in a wagon and, you know, mess stuff up town to town, you can. That's all on the table.
Does it have to be like can you make worlds that are like modern?
Yeah.
Like they have cars, there's cities, and there's actual guns instead of using swords, arrows, and all of the kind of like the medieval stuff.
Yeah, yes, you can. So Wizards of the Coast doesn't publish anything officially that is sort of like modern. However, much like your instinct, and I think a lot of people's instinct, they're like, I like this, but like I want to drive a motorcycle.
Kind of basically like Dungeons and Dragons met Grand Theft Auto.
Exactly. Yes. And so absolutely. There are various websites, various free things, free things that you can get your hands on. This is usually advice for the DM. Most players, the DM will probably have to like tell them, especially new players, kind of tell you like what's up with this universe. But there's tons of material out there from third-party publishers. A lot of it you can get for completely free, like with permission from them. Like they're giving it out for free. That give you rule sets for how guns would work, how cars would work, how different scenarios. There's adventure campaigns. There's also science fiction versions of that as well. So if you want to go sci-fi and you want whole worlds, that's what's kind of cool about Dungeons and Dragons specifically, is back around 2000, they opened up a lot of their copyright material, and the kinds of things that normally wouldn't be allowed, they kind of did what Bethesda did with mods, right? Or what what's that studio that used to make video games but now it's just Steam. Steam is, or what Steam used to do with mods, right? Where it's not so much that Bethesda or you know, Bethesda would be super cool with people making a ton of money off of mods if they weren't involved in that somehow. But like, if somebody makes a little money off mods, like they have a little Kickstarter, Bethesda ain't coming for them, right? Like that's just not happening. And so, or like a Patreon or something like that. Bethesda's just not gonna come for those people. And in a lot of ways, they're going to kind of collaborate with them sometimes and work out ways that it almost codifies it more as a business. That's the same thing D&D does. There are tons of people that make content that uses D&D's rule system, things from the D&D universe, you know, locations sometimes even, but they update them to modern world, or they make them planets in a sci-fi adventure or stuff like that. And Wizards of the Coast, the company that runs Dungeons and Dragons, is fine with it. They're like, yes, this is all good because this gets more people playing our things. Like they understood and they figured this out over 20 years ago. The more people that make stuff for this means the more people that know how to play it and the more people that will buy the original books, because maybe you get introduced to a campaign with a person that's running a modern or a sci-fi thing, so you don't buy anything initially. But then that itch is going to come in, being like, yeah, but what's the actual game like, right? It's just like it's just like it would surprise me if somebody had played all of the Elder Scrolls series and they'd never even touched or looked into the Fallout series. At the same time, I'm like, it's the other big RPG from the same company. It may not be your vibe, you may not want to really play it, but you're gonna like watch a YouTube video about it at least, right? You're gonna look at it and be like, maybe.
Yeah, it's the same concept, but in just a different different world, and kind of like appeals to the audience who doesn't like medieval dragon stuff.
Yeah.
And it kind of immerses them into the kind of moderny type of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, that's a
twists.
Fallout is a great example of the kind of fun you could have with like a tabletop campaign. Thank God the property exists. But like that's big tabletop energy, right? They're like, what if modern but kind of retro and also post-apocalypse lives? Like that's the kind of stuff that you can do at a tabletop easily, that you need a team of, a team of 50 to 100 developers, 5 years at this point, 6 years to put together. And then you and your friends can be like, what if like, what's a good example? It's like, what if Harry Potter, but instead of Harry Potter, it's like a public magic school set in like Detroit, and like there's all the problems of the modern world, but like they're still going to magic school. What would that be like? And with a table group, you could probably find some people, whether it's through a Discord server or amongst your own friends, they'll be like, yeah, that sounds like a fun idea. Let's try that out. And then as a GM coming up with that idea, you then spend a handful of hours. Some people are really good off the top of their head, but most people spend several hours of sort of overtime writing notes about their world and their campaign and some sort of guidelines, and then start the game. And then before each session, they usually prepare it. That's usually how you do it. I would always say that doing the least amount of work that you're comfortable doing, unless you have a lot of fun doing the notes writing, doing the least amount that you're comfortable doing is the best idea, because you never know what's going to happen at the table, and you might plan this whole big thing, and then your party's like, yeah, but we go left, not right. And you're like, well, okay, I guess we're gonna come up with something left in the moment. And so that kind of a concept happens a lot. And that's what's fun about D&D, is that as a DM with the campaigns I'm running now, I've had to change multiple things multiple times on every campaign. Like clockwork, it's just gonna happen. They're gonna be interested in something or do something, and it'll have consequences. And then I'll have to go back and be like, well, I guess that plot is done. I can't do that now. I'm gonna do this instead. And that's fun. It makes it exciting for me, because I'm not just like walking them through my story. They're making my story different as they play.
So when I was looking at like Dungeon Master stuff, I saw that under like a Google like search that people have searched before was how much can Dungeon Masters make?
Oh, yeah, charging for Dungeon Mastering, yeah.
Yeah, so are you familiar with the area of like people who actually get paid for Dungeon Masters? Like why? Because like I saw rates that people were paying up to like $100 an hour.
Yeah,
for Dungeon Masters.
There's some people
I was like,
that give
wait. Did I choose the wrong profession here? Like,
certainly we all have. Who wouldn't love just playing pretend around a table and making $100 an hour doing that? Dungeon Masters. So the charge for Dungeon Master situation, it's a little hotly debated in D&D. Because D&D came from a realm in the 70s of just friends gathering around a table and playing together, right? It was a very personal, intimate thing. And then over the 80s and 90s, it kind of slowly gained kind of a cult. I hate using the word cult because of the thing related to D&D in the 80s and 90s called Satanic Panic, which was that it was admittedly the first like mass distributed D&D player's handbook had a giant demon on the cover. It's a dope demon, but like we were in the era of Reagan and George Bush Sr., and we were at a very kind of moral majority, kind of conservative social swing. And here's this game where people can play warlocks and fight demons, and then maybe get captured by demons and stuff like that. And so, typical kind of like parents afraid of new thing, stuff. But yeah, D&D kind of had an underground following for a long time, kind of growing almost in response to this pushback from pop culture, or from like news. Like there was a 60 Minutes episode about how D&D might get your children to worship the devil and stuff like that. Like
Oh, wow.
like it went that far. It's weird to think of now, but like think of the nonsense that the internet has on like YouTube and various news media sites that are like so fringe and conspiracy theory. Yeah, that existed occasionally in the 80s and 90s. They just aired as segments on broadcast television. But nonetheless, yeah, so being because a lot of people played it with friends, it was a very like close, like you'd go to your local game store and you'd know everyone that was playing and you'd play in a campaign and everything. Charging for it seemed a little strange because it was like this isn't a profession, but it can be. I would so the rates to break it down, most DMs when they're starting out charge essentially $10 per player per session. And so what it will be is, so like that $100 per hour thing is probably $100 for the table. And so if there's like 4 or 5 players, they're splitting that up a little
insane.
bit. But $10 per player per session. So that means if you have, let's say you have, 5 players in there, that's $50 per session. The average session is usually 2 to 3 hours. So that's not big money, right? That's honestly like normal, like working wage. If it's 2 hours, it's decent. It's $25 an hour. If it's 3 hours, it's only a little bit, it's more like $16.50 an hour and stuff. And so that's where people start. But the people that charge the big money are the people that come to a table with miniatures, with sets, with, battle maps. They might have lighting. They might have soundtracks. They might have a dry ice machine. They're coming fully engaged to be in character, and they're giving you maximum performative D&D. Like they as a DM are doing
Wow.
voices for all their characters.
Yeah, I
They're
was gonna
spending
say.
serious time working on the plots and tying it to your character's backstory, because the people that play or pay for D&D are deeply invested in like the plots and stories and character growths. So like those are the people that a DM can really connect with and build special stuff and spend a lot of time really like crafting cool things for them to do. So it's sort of a premium service. That being said, there's no control for that. So admittedly, a really kind of crummy DM or a very average DM could in theory charge a group of people money for a session, and then they could just be like, well, that not to be judgy on what restaurants people like, but you could go into a restaurant, you could go into a nice fine dining restaurant and then get their I don't know, their New York strip steak, and then when you eat it and you paid $45-50 because this was a standalone fine dining steakhouse, and then you step out of there and you're like, I could have gotten that at Outback Steakhouse. That's just a normal Outback Steakhouse New York strip. And so like there's no control, but there are review sites that have been popping up and people that have been doing that. And that's one way to get paid to be a DM. The other ways to get paid to be a DM is to make a bunch of content and have a Patreon. And one of the Patreon bonuses is that people can pay to be in a monthly game with you via Patreon. And then of course the other way is to do it on like Twitch or for like a podcast, and then follow the steps of content creators and how they make money with advertising and stuff like that.
That's actually pretty cool. There's so many ways to monetize like this kind of form of games.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty cool because like I feel like if you're paying someone to kind of like set the storyline for you, you do build like a very nice little relationship
Yeah.
with them, and you kind of have like a nice little click for however long that you decide to pay them. But I think that's awesome that you can actually get paid
Yeah.
to kind of just just be really creative and
Yeah.
just kind of like working with people. Really, that's really
I
cool.
I want to say that as a DM, I used to be really against it. Now I'm not as much anymore. I think it's mostly because I've recognized that, like if someone's playing a kind of a classic MMO, right? Like a old school World of Warcraft times and everything. We all used to pay $15 a month to play that video game, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to pretend that I haven't spent money on DLC or loot boxes the occasional time in my life. I'm not proud of it, but I've done it. Those are the kinds of things that we've all done. And so paying a DM is basically like just paying a video game creator, and especially if they're really good and they're bringing stuff that, like, say with me, when I play in my house games, we usually just do what's called theater of the mind, where it's all imagination. There's no minis, there's no maps, it's all just description, it's all words, right? I wouldn't expect anyone to pay for that. I'm just coming up with cool stories. Maybe I'm doing some voices, maybe I've got some good story hooks, but I'm spending time, but I'm not really spending any money or like really planning out a lot of cool sets and things to interact with for a player. That being said, if I'm paying someone, that's the level that I expect to bring. And if I like it, then that's just going to make me want to come back more. And me as a player, going to be more excited about that game. So it's like I eased up a little bit on my kind of resistance to it early on. And now I think it's like, you know what? If there's people that want to pay and they have the money to pay, and there's a DM that really brings it at the table more than, say, a friend would, then go for it. They should be paid for their time, and maybe they get lucky and they're very good and they get to play D&D for 4 or 5 nights a week. But then that's almost like a job. Then you've turned a cool hobby into an actual job where it's like, all right, you got to keep all these stories separate. You got to spend time writing in characters. You got to make sure your voices are consistent. You got to have all these minis and supplies. And then suddenly it's not different than than other things. That's why I went a different route when I thought, well, maybe I could, make a little bit of money to pay for my various subscriptions and books, than doing charge for sessions.
That's fair.
Mhm.
That's fair. Wow. Honestly, I'm very glad that we had this talk because I got a full experience of what D&D really is, and I think a lot of people get it wrong when they think that it's just a lot of just like nerdy stuff.
A lot
I
of people think it's a
very-
lot of rules.
yes.
And there are those there, but they're for support. In reality, it's a lot of just make up imaginary game. It's improv. It's literally improv theater at a table. That's what it is. And it's just kind of spitballing ideas with friends, which are conversations everyone has. Like, we all watch videos on YouTube, or read articles about like ultimate fan casts of movies, or wouldn't it be cool if they did a sequel to this, or what could the next video game from X company entail. We all have those conversations, and D&D is basically that, just as a continuing story. Like, what if I was a fighter named, Jareth, and I was basically Mad Mardigan from Willow, but like in a world with a different party, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think hopefully the people who listen to this episode is that they get a clearer understanding of what it really is, and how it kind of brings out the creativity of you, and it gives you just like what you really want. Like, you can imagine if you wanted to have like a John Wick part 4,
Yeah.
maybe you can do that
Get after it.
how you want the ending to be, how you want John to act with everyone. I think it's just a very creative space, and I wouldn't be opposed to trying it. But for me, I'm not the most creative person. Sometimes I'm very standard when it comes to even creating characters.
I mean,
in, like,
standard
Skyrim and Fallout.
standard characters work. Like, that's the thing, is there's a reason there's a ton of tropes in D&D of like the kind of like rascally bard character, which is just basically a minstrel that hits on people in taverns and then like likes to trick people, or like a thieving rogue that's like super stealthy and lies all the time and you can never catch them, and they like to pickpocket constantly. Like, those are fun character types to play, and there's nothing wrong with playing that, and being inventive is less important than being entertained. I Most tables usually have a couple people that are more gregarious, they're more involved, they're just more outgoing people, a couple people that are like middling, and then maybe one or two people that just kind of like chill. And maybe they're excited, they love coming to play, but maybe they're also kind of partially spectating the rest of the table. So like, you know, they're there, they're useful, they're helping out in combat, they've got skills that other party members don't have, and they get to feel like they're a part of it. But not everyone has to be like an actor. Some people can just be like, no, I just like hanging out with my friends, drinking and eating, and finding out what this story unfolds, and I have a character. And then if you're a good DM, you can get a few moments with that person. You make sure that that person gets their moments, and you're not overwhelming them with a ton of decisions and a ton of like required play. You're meeting them where they want to be, because good DMs make sure that everyone at their table feels like they're welcome at the table, they're wanted at the table, and they're there to have fun at the table and there to be a player. But what that is for each person is unique, and that's the job of a good DM, is to find out what that is.
Where can my listeners find you? Any podcasts or social media?
Lots of stuff. Okay. So for D&D stuff, we're gonna start there. The main podcast you can find me is the Low Armor Cast, which you can find on social media at the Low AC. I just started posting TikTok videos. And then of course, Low Armor Cast is on almost every podcasting platform that you can look for, as well as lowarmorcast.com. And that's an actual play D&D podcast. So we're sitting and we're playing D&D in person, and then I'm kind of trimming out some of the filler stuff. So like the table talk or questions like, how do I do this? Or what do? I kind of cut that stuff out. So I might have the players talking about how they want to accomplish a goal, but I'm not going to have a player being like, wait, like quietly reading to themselves what the spell does, or taking 5 minutes on their own to figure out what they want to do while other people talk. So it'll be kind of a contained, it's like D&D, but like a little bit more produced. So that's Low Armor Cast. And then you can follow us on Twitch at dying_of_exposure, or just type in dying of exposure Twitch into a search engine. And on that, I have 2 games. One that's a D&D campaign, which is Waterdeep Dragon Heist. That's a published adventure from D&D. So it's something that they give out to DMs to be like, here, this has all the plot points and characters and combat and stuff. You can add to it, you can change it up a bit, but here's a full story to run your players through. And then I have Through the Mill on Tuesday nights, which is weekly, and that's all. That's my own world. That's completely my own world. All original stuff, but using the rule systems and character classes and heritages and stuff of D&D. So that's all the D&D stuff. And then otherwise, youtube.com/dying of exposure for YouTube videos about really whatever. They're not D&D related necessarily. They might be about a video game. They might be about the new He-Man cartoon. It's whatever. So that, and last but not least, just the Twitch channel again. If you want to watch me play video games all summer long, I'm playing through the Mass Effect Legendary Edition. So if that's more your vibe, you want to chat more about D&D, you can ask me there. Or you can hit me at the Low AC on everything else. There's also like nerdcore music and stuff like that, but that's too many links. Mostly D&D and video game streaming. That's what you can.
Awesome. Yeah, I will definitely have everything linked to Steven's social medias, Twitch, and all that in the description of this podcast. And don't forget, check out moreyouknowpodcast.com, where I will be posting everything there as well. Plus anything else that Steve thinks that will be helpful to kind of like supplement the stuff that he talked about today. So if you have any like videos, Steve, that you think that would be helpful for like people who want to immerse themselves more into this podcast, please send it over after the podcast, either through Reddit or through email, and I will post it in there.
That is one thing I do want to say. My last advice for anyone that's interested in D&D. We live in a time where it's easiest as possible to get into D&D because you don't even need to find a group at first. Simply go to one of the many channels, and I'll put a couple of links, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Twitch, or whether it's podcast form, and listen to a live play or an actual play. These are great revealers of behind the curtain of what D&D is, and I'm going to recommend doing it with podcasts first, because podcasts don't have sets and miniatures and other things. And so on top of my own, which I hope that you listen to, please feel free to go to any of the ones I recommend and send here to Brian. They are good. They are entertaining. They're in little bite sizes for a campaign. They're like an hour and a half long per episode at most. And you will be able to listen to it. And then if that sounds interesting, you can probably find people that can do that. So I'm sorry. It's just very important. I love getting people into D&D, and a lot of people don't know that they can just listen to podcasts and they can hear kind of what it's like being at a table where you don't have minis, you don't have sets, you don't have lighting, you don't have all the other stuff, you don't even have Roll20 or any of these like online tools. You just have the players, their characters, and talking. And that is what D&D was and will always kind of continue to be at its core.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Steve, so much for coming on. I definitely had a pleasure talking to you and learning more about Dungeons and Dragons myself. I'll catch everyone on the next episode, and can't wait to get back on schedule and bring back some edumacation to everyone.
Yes, indeed. Thanks for having me on, Brian.
Yep, no problem. Have a good one. All right, and that's a wrap. I hope you enjoyed this show of The More You Know. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating this podcast on Apple Podcasts. It'll certainly help me out in the algorithm, and be sure to subscribe or follow to The More You Know on your favorite podcasting platform like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google Podcasts, or any of your favorite podcasting apps. And lastly, if you would like to contribute to The More You Know, you can head over to anchor.fm/The More You Know Pod and contribute any monetary value to help the quality of the show, and in the future bring on some more interesting guests. Thank you so much, guys. I appreciate all of my listeners, and I hope you guys have a wonderful week.